Welcome to the Success Ascent. My name is Pat Mancuso, and we are excited that you are with us today. I am extremely excited about our guest today, Miss Claire Chandler, and we're going to get to her in just a second. However, as I start every show, I want to thank you all for being here today, for listening, for supporting us. If you want to subscribe and get our updates, you can go to www.thesuccessascent.com. That's where we host our podcast, where we also update everything, and we'd love to make that connection with you. So we are excited, and I'm excited to introduce to you today Ms. Claire Chandler. Now, let me tell you about Claire. First of all, she's going to talk to us about this concept called the Whirlpool Effect. And when I first heard it and first started researching it, I'm going, oh my goodness, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, we have to talk about that Whirlpool Effect. Let me just give you all a hint. You all have done this. Anybody's listening to this, if you're an entrepreneur, you have created a whirlpool effect, and we're going to talk about that. So Claire works with many diverse startups and corporations and has done so for the last 25 years. She's experienced that most companies fall apart once they start to scale, and that is true because many companies struggle with people issues and solutions around that. As a solution to this business time bomb, I love that, she's created the Whirlpool Effect, which we're going to talk about, which is a revolutionary way for leaders and teams around unifying visions that attracts, retains, and motivates talent to achieve your mission. Claire's simple yet powerful process as an entrepreneur, business owner, and an author is helping many companies find and fix bottlenecks that are choking their business performance so they can rapidly scale while reducing their growing pains. She is also the author, as we talked about the Whirlpool Effect, as well as some other strategies and systems that we're going to hear about today. So Claire, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be here.
Well, we're excited, and I know we're going to learn a lot today. So Claire, I always have fun with my guests at the beginning, and I say, okay, that was Claire on paper. Tell us about the real Claire. Tell us something about the real Claire.
Yeah. So thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for that intro. So I'm a lifelong Jersey girl. The Jersey Shore show does not cast us in the right light. Of course, they are not actual Jerseyans, but the Jersey Shore itself, where I happen to live, is a great place to visit and live and work. So I consider myself a corporate survivor. So I spent close to 20 years in my career in corporate America in various roles, communications and branding and marketing and customer relations, and the last several years in human resources. And amidst all of that, I decided that, or sort of discovered that where I was in the ladder that I was climbing was not really fulfilling for me. It wasn't feeding my passion. So I kind of threw caution to the wind 10 years ago, left that corporate cocoon, wandered around for the first couple of years to really sort of narrow in on what I wanted to make my business all about. And so 2 years later, in 2013, I formed my company, Talent Boost, and sort of just, built that brand and that business around the things that I am passionate about, which I know we'll tap into a little bit during our conversation today.
Absolutely. Well, I have to be honest with you, Claire. I've never understood that whole Jersey Shore thing. I never watched the show, and I know people will go, what? Let's not go there. I'm sure there's value. So Claire, let's talk about that journey of success. We're going to talk about the Whirlpool Effect and the systems and models, but I always like to dig in the beginning and say, okay, you've been an entrepreneur for now 10 years, obviously in the corporate world for 25. So you've got a lot of experience. Let's talk about your journey of success. As an entrepreneur, what's some things you've experienced that you would share with others in that journey?
As an entrepreneur, at least this was true for me, and actually with every entrepreneur I have ever come across, we all had this life-shaking, transformative event that made us decide, get off the fence, because a lot of us sort of debate about, is the entrepreneurial journey the right one for me? Can I really make a go of it? Am I going to fall flat on my face, et cetera? And we all get to this sort of decision point, or this event, or this experience that makes us decide, okay, now is the time, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go for it. That was certainly true for me, and it was what propelled me out of that corporate bubble in 2011, out into the, to the sort of risky, unknown world of entrepreneurial pursuits. And for me, looking back, if I had it to do over again, I still would have made the same decision. I would have left when I did, but I would have made it more of an intentional effort to surround myself with the right people, whether it was a coach, a sounding board, some research, some more market intel. I over time kind of surrounded myself with that type of a network and that type of knowledge, but I did, kind of wander the earth a little bit for those first 2 years until I really kind of figured out what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, and I hear that a lot, as a consultant and coach and, talking with entrepreneurs. It's one of the things they know they need somebody, that sounding board, that coach, that mentor, that consultant. And yet sometimes they don't, take advantage of it earlier in the process. So I get it. I've heard that a number of times. So in your growth, like in the growth of your business, what's been the biggest challenge that you've experienced as an entrepreneur that you broke through? And what did you do to break through it?
Oh, love that question. So, for me, every day as an entrepreneur, especially in the beginning, was uncharted waters, right? Because I had spent the first couple of decades of my career in corporate roles. And when you work in corporate America, there is a lot of definition around your job, the company, what you can and cannot do, what you should and should not say, how you should and should not walk. Feel free to ask me about that one in a minute. But there's a lot of parameters around that box that you kind of cram your whole personality into. And so when I broke out on my own and went, onto my entrepreneurial journey, I still had some of that residual legacy that said, oh, be careful, Claire. Don't show people, Claire at a 10. Show them Claire at like a 6, right? Because I'm quirky. I can be a little bit sarcastic. I definitely believe in the power of humor. And so, one of the things that I finally kind of broke through about was not a physical barrier. It was more of a mindset shift. And I got to the point where I just made the conscious decision. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it as Claire at a 10. I'm going to play full out. I'm going to pursue opportunities, not only that I know that I can contribute my skills and experience to, but that I'm going to love doing with people that I'm going to love serving. And once I made that conscious decision that I'm not going to, do this halfway, and I'm going to do this not just to the best of my ability, but with my completely amplified personality, it really created the right opportunities for me.
Claire, it's funny that you say that. Two things. First, for people who are listening that know me, they're probably going, that's exactly how that operates. That, there's no filters. And when you were talking about that, it was like, yeah, I've never had a corporate job. And truly, I've never had a corporate job. And as soon as something I'm doing feels like it's getting close to a corporate job, I'm like out of there. Because I do not want somebody to tell me how to do. I want to ask you about how you should not walk. What?
Yeah. So, people have asked me what was sort of the defining moment, what made you decide to go out on your own entrepreneurial journey. And one of the reasons that propelled me the year that it did was because I got a cancer diagnosis. And so, long story short, I'm totally cancer free now, thank God. But it really kind of put my life into perspective. It really woke me up to, the whole concept of life is too short to do anything that you are not completely passionate about. But one of the other things that in hindsight, I realized was that during my corporate career, which don't get me wrong, I would not have traded my years in corporate America. I learned a lot. There is structure, as I said before, definition that a corporate career provides you that will serve you well as you go out onto an entrepreneurial journey.
Sure.
But looking back, I can remember having a boss who said, literally said to me once, you really should tone down your walk. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you kind of have this sort of bounce to your step when you're walking down the hall, and it's freaking out some people. Like they feel like, you know something they don't. And I'm like, well, maybe I do. right?
I know.
Yeah. So it's like, it was piecing together those types of moments where looking back, I'm like, that was when I realized after far too long that, Claire at a 10 doesn't fit in a corporate box.
Wow. Wow. You know what? I'm not sure how much longer you stayed after that. I have to tell you, my stay would have been the afternoon. It's like, okay, I am out of here. Oh my, oh my. And
Yeah.
funny, I guess I'm thinking about that type of environment, even though I'm sure it was a great company. But that's the thinking, right? I mean, that's where there's so much opportunity to have impacts on companies based upon what you're doing. So, so thank goodness you're healthy now. I'm glad to hear that, obviously.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this whirlpool effect. Because I know when you talk about it, the people who have ever been around me in my life are going to go, he is so guilty of doing that. So I want you to tell them, because I'm just going to own it right now.
Okay, fair enough. So there's a difference between the whirlpool effect and the churn effect. And I talk about both of those. So the just even the concept of the whirlpool effect or that phrase came from a very fond childhood memory. So I grew up in New Jersey, born and raised. The summers here are very hot, very humid. And the coolest kid on the block was the one with the swimming pool in her backyard, which spoiler alert was not me. But it was my very good friend, Judy. We are still, best friends today, like childhood friend, but she's the one with the pool in the backyard. So all the neighborhood kids flocked to her backyard and spent our summers in the pool. And invariably during that afternoon, between playing, Marco Polo and, water volleyball or whatever else we were doing, somebody would say whirlpool. And we immediately knew what that meant. It meant whatever else we were doing, we would just start following each other in a circle. And after a couple of laps around the pool, we created this whirlpool effect where we could pick up our feet and be carried along with the flow. And the more that I thought about that, I thought, you know what? That's what real leadership looks like. You have a very simple message that everyone around you who hears it immediately attaches meaning to. They understand what the outcome is they're trying to achieve, and they contribute their whole heads, hands, and hearts to making that a reality. So that's what the concept of the whirlpool effect is all about in the name, the whirlpool effect. But I mentioned the churn effect, right? So now I don't know if growing up, Pat, you had a similar experience or this sort of concept of creating a whirlpool in a pool that you were in.
Not really, Claire, because I don't know how to swim. I am the only man on earth who does not know how to swim. And when they put me in a pool, I sink. And people go, "Wow, you can't float."
So not only can't swim, you can't float. Okay.
There you go. So no whirlpool effect
right.
here.
Fair point. So typically what would happen is, in the middle of doing all this whirlpool effect and picking up your feet and getting swept along by the flow, there was always that one kid. And he would decide that he's going to be a buster and he's going to swim in the opposite direction. And it would cause churn and chop, and it would go against the ease with which we were able to get swept along. And when you translate that into business, we know that that's true, right? That rare is the occasion that we have this true state of flow, this whirlpool effect, because we are following closely behind, and enthusiastically so, behind leaders who get it. And invariably there are these forms of churn that show up, whether it's because, we've put the wrong people into the wrong roles, or there's a lot of bad behavior that is going unchecked, right? Or just there's this lack of clarity around what our own whirlpool effect should look like. What is that outcome? What is that mission we're striving for? So churn shows up in every single business. I don't care what size, what industry, how much experience you have. There's always going to be some churn, some hurdle, some obstacle that threatens to stand in the way of that true whirlpool effect.
Okay, so the good thing is that when you were saying whirlpool effect, I'm not guilty of that. I'm guilty of actually creating whirlpools. I'm not guilty of churn, because I was thinking the whirlpool was way something else, like, tornado behind me type of thing, where everybody was
in a good way. No, in a good way. This is a good whirlpool effect.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good whirlpool. I like that. So let me ask you a question around that. You said every organization has churn, and every organization has people who cause the churn, right?
Yes.
So tell me how organizations get rid of that churn, or minimize the churn, or take the churn and fix the churn.
Yep.
Like, what's the model?
Yep. It starts at the top. Too many organizations think that, once they've gotten to this point where there are silos, where there's bad behavior, where there's lack of performance or underperformance or high turnover, where the good people are leaving and the ones that are sort of inefficient or disengaged are staying. Leaders, unfortunately, tend to look outside of themselves and say, well, we must have hired the wrong people. Or, we just don't have a very well thought out process for disciplining and for, getting people out. And those things may be true, but those are way down the line extensions of the culture that you've created. And the biggest impact on a company's culture is the behavior of its leaders at the top.
Yeah.
And so, the way to fix the churn is to start from the top down. And it doesn't mean you have to wholesale swap out your leadership, your CEO, your executive team, necessarily. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's the case. But more often than not, you have to just wake up leadership to understand that the sources of churn are a lot closer than they have been considering. And so the good news is, once you can get them to kind of accept that, the way out of that, right? The way out of the churn back to the whirlpool effect is completely within their control, because it has more to do with mindset and behavior and attitude and clarity than it does about physical barriers.
That makes perfect sense. So when you talk to entrepreneurs, and let's just say, they've got that right talent, but in today's world, they're competing with companies, and I'm shifting gears a little bit, so let me just put that out there. The hiring environment right now is interesting in a lot of aspects. Certainly we'll say the positions that are more replicatable, kind of similar, those are people are having, restaurants, grocery stores, those type of, they're having a hard time, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. Let's go a little bit beyond that in organizational talent. If you're a smaller company growing, how do you compete with the bigger companies? How do you compete? Let's say you have 3 people and you want to hire a director of marketing. Well, you're competing with companies like, Best Buy, Target, Walmart for director of marketing. How do you do that?
I literally was having this conversation with a client earlier today, and some of the companies you just mentioned were the exact companies he mentioned. He said, ESP, right? It's gotta be. And the advantage that the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Targets of the world have that the smaller and the startup and the up and coming businesses don't is name recognition, right? Anybody who works for Amazon, and I know several people who work for Amazon, talk about how great their job is. They talk about how great the culture is. And, to me, as a faithful Amazon customer, like to the point where my husband and I can be driving around, and if there's an Amazon Prime truck on the road, he will say to me, "Oh, there's your friend. I'm sure he's on his way to our house," right? Yeah, he's a funny guy, but but it's true, right? It's a brand that's recognizable. It's a brand that, from a consumer standpoint, has a loyal following, and from an employee standpoint, has a loyal following. So how can I don't want to say the run of the mill, the smaller company, the one that's unknown, compete with that? And what I said to this client earlier today, because he's in the same situation, he is competing with Amazon and Walmart and Target for talent. But no one's ever heard of their company. And I said, you have 2 challenges ahead of you. One is, how do you get the right people in the door? And the second challenge is, how do you keep them, right? And the answer is, you don't lock them in and treat them so badly that they've got no confidence left that they're not going to go anywhere else, right? So there's 2 challenges. And in this hiring market, even Amazon is struggling with that. We're coming out of to say it's an unprecedented year is an understatement, but this globally shared pain of COVID and what it has forced businesses to do and to change and overcome. And so now on the back end of that, we've got things like federal stimulus relief. We've got unemployment, payouts that the requirements for staying on unemployment have loosened up. So it is, we're at an unprecedented time where for a significant portion of the workforce, they're incentivized to stay home. Yeah. They're incentivized not to go out. And I don't want to get into a protracted debate about, the merits of that. I think the intention of that was positive. Right. But the fallout of that for companies competing for talent has been, very keenly felt. So I think, what I said to this client earlier, and I think is broadly applicable to your audience, is that there are things you can do to increase your bandwidth from a recruiting standpoint, from an attraction standpoint, trying to get your applicants enticed by the concept of working for a smaller company and the merits of that, right? It's more flexible. You've got a little bit more agility in terms of, forging your own career path and having direct access to the decision makers, et cetera. But the real magic is going to happen with what you do to keep them, right? You need to create an environment, whether people know your brand or not, you need to create an environment from the top down, it's got to be consistent, where people want to stay. And not only want to stay, but want to contribute, their best talents, their best ideas, their best energy, their best attitude toward achieving your mission.
Yeah, I love that. So, it's you said something which I'll add, and this is a coach, consultant, and entrepreneur, is as leaders, when we make decisions, the federal stimulus is one of those examples. We sometimes don't understand the unintended consequences because we don't slow down just enough. And sometimes making decisions quickly is a great thing. And in this case, there was no roadmap for the pandemic. And yet, clearly, there were some unintended consequences along the way. So Claire, let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm starting, or maybe I'm, been around for a while, and I have all this stuff. I always say like I'm the chief bottle washer because, I don't have a marketing department. I don't have an accounting department. Maybe I don't, and yet these things still need to be done. They still need to be dealt with. And I know, in my world, and certainly in your world, you've created a model to help people deal with what I would call the messiness of entrepreneurialism. Will you share that with us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I've been in this situation. I'm sure you can relate to that. When you're an entrepreneur, let alone a leader in a large organization, those early days, and those days could be translated into weeks and even months, are like trying to drink from a fire hose. And I know that has become an overused analogy, but it is true in this case. Entrepreneurs, especially for starting out, when you're a solopreneur with a grand idea and a big vision for what it can become, you have to do everything.
Right.
And it is very easy to get overwhelmed by that. And it is very easy to stagnate because there are so many decisions that you need to make on a day-to-day basis, both for firefighting and for trying to move the needle toward your long-term goal, that you can very easily get swept under by that. And so the model that I've created and the model that I work on with my clients takes that fire hose dose of overwhelm and narrows it down, and not compresses everything onto one lens, but really narrows it down onto literally one page, where a leader, an entrepreneur, an executive, a founder can take a look at that, and any decision that they have to make, whether again it's a day-to-day, how do we get from here to there, or it's a longer term, how do we get from where we are to where we want to be, and they make that decision much easier. You had said something just earlier about this ability or this need to make decisions quickly. It was very difficult to do that under COVID because, again, this was unfamiliar territory for anybody. There was no roadmap for that. But in general, the competitive differentiator, right? The business, the leader, the entrepreneur who can make the right decisions faster wins.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the way to do it. And so the model that I've created really helps those leaders, kind of narrow down their perspective, because it's so easy to walk into a room wearing every single hat. One of the biggest things that tripped me up back in the beginning when I was an entrepreneur was that I didn't know how to just wear the hat that I needed at the time when I was across the table from a client. And what I mean by that is what I thrive in is being in the room with a client or a prospect and kind of having the arm around the shoulder saying, I feel your pain. I've been where you are. There's a reason that a large component of my client base is in corporate America, because I spend so much time there and I know the constraints that they're under, and I also know the way out of them, right? But I love, that's the part that I love, is the doing, it's the solving, it's the brainstorming, it's the listening, it's in asking the right questions. And the big misstep that I did in the beginning was also thinking, how do we need to structure the scope? Thinking like a client manager. How do we set up the invoicing? Thinking like the accountant. How do we, start to take what we've done and type this up as an action log and send it out? Thinking like my own administrative assistant. We walk into every situation, especially in the beginning, wearing every single hat. And that does not make us multifaceted. It makes us distracted. So, getting to clarity about what it is you're trying to accomplish and what you need to be in that immediate moment with that interaction, it enables you and allows you to become fully present through the lens that you need to be looking through at any given time.
And that's the decision, you call it the decision dashboard.
Yeah. So the decision dashboard. Yes. So, and I know you're going to scroll on the bottom, the link to that, so people can grab it if they want to. So the decision dashboard is that process, is that framework boiled down into a very brief ebook that literally walks the reader step by step through the exact same process that I take clients through. And it's so funny because, I've been doing this now for 10 years. I founded my company, 8 years ago, but I've been out on my own for 10 years. And all the tools, all the frameworks, all the programs, all the hacks that I've come up with, it's this one page that my clients come back to and they say, I literally still walk around with this in my pocket, not the whole book, but just the one page. Yeah. And they, because it just lays out at a glance what they need to be factoring into their decisions.
I love that.
Yeah. So I decided, why wait for every client engagement? Let me just put it out there to the masses, and whoever wants to, get value from it, it's there for the taking.
So you can use this. I'll give you what do they call that? Literary permission, because you said something and it made sense. So as an entrepreneur, it's like we're drinking from a fire hose. All we need to do is turn the fire hose around to pour out all the fires.
That would help, right? Yeah. It is really that. It's really taking all the different input that we are getting and that we're processing and saying, do I really need to be looking at all of that at the same time? And the answer is usually no.
Yeah, absolutely. So, gosh, this has been awesome. And we're going to shift gears now. I prepared you for this, so you've had some time. I always ask our guests, what's the best advice that you've ever been given that hopefully you followed?
Yeah. So when I was a young manager, so this was years ago, but it was my early years of managing other people, not just being responsible for myself. I had a colleague in the company that I was working in who became a very good friend. And he said something that no management training had ever taught me, which was figure out what it is that you have been put into that role to accomplish. And the clearer you are on that, the easier your day-to-day decisions are going to become. And if that sounds familiar to you, like what I just, talked about with the decision dashboard and that whole framework, it's because I took that to heart at the time. I implemented it. I saw immediate results and immediate clarity. And I just carried it forward with me. And so that same lesson, that same concept of get really clear on what your business is in existence to accomplish and what your individual role is in existence to accomplish. And it makes those decisions much faster and easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that makes perfect sense. Okay, we're going to flip it upside down. We've just got a couple minutes left. What is the absolute worst advice you've ever been given that hopefully you didn't follow? And if you did, what did you learn?
Yeah, 100% the worst advice I was ever given was tone down your walk. And as you probably know by now, I did not follow it.
But that was the best advice you turned it into. I'm out of here.
I have to tell you, just as a quick side story to that, I mentioned, I had cancer. So this is all in the same year. And so, you go through treatment, you do what you have to do. And then for me, the follow-up was very regular blood work and follow-up tests.
Right.
And I was in the waiting room of the lab that I had to go get my routine tests. And I was walking toward the back to the phlebotomist and hoping that I got one that wasn't too heavy-handed with the needle and whatever. And this woman comes up to me from the waiting room and she said, I just have to tell you, you have the happiest walk I've ever seen.
Wow.
And if that didn't validate that I was right to be Claire at a 10, nothing would.
Well, and you see, you chose not to get political or go anywhere earlier. I'm going to tell you, if someone said that to someone today in most companies, like tone down your walk, I guarantee you there'd be a lawsuit within hours. Somebody would be offended by that.
No doubt.
Just don't do that. Just if you're meeting somebody, don't do that. Don't
let your people be who they naturally are. Give them the vision and then get out of their way to do it in the best way they know how. That's how you build a great company. Without disclosing anything, is that person still with that organization? Don't answer that question. I hope not. No, he retired. Fortunately, he retired.
Yeah. Well, should have earlier maybe. So Claire, I'm going to do some little PSA here while you get ready to give us your final thought as we go. So ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I know for me, Claire brought so many things to the table today, and we're just so excited she was here. If you enjoy what we're doing, please let us know. Subscribe at your favorite podcast channel source. You can go to www.thesuccessascent.com, which we will scroll right there. And also any feedback, any place you can leave us feedback. Obviously, Apple is one of the most popular places to give us ratings. Do that. And we just love so much that you support us and keep telling us to keep doing what we're doing. So Claire, here we go. We're going to close out the show. I've prepared you for this. What's the one final thought you would leave us with? The entrepreneurs that are listening live or will be listening and the podcast episode, what would you share with us?
Honestly, I would say there are so many reasons why you should not become an entrepreneur, and anyone around you is going to be the first to tell you that it's risky and it's crazy and what are you thinking and why now and all of this. And all I can tell you is the more true you are to yourself, the more in touch you are with what you could offer the world and the world that you want to build, just go for it because life is too short. And if you have any at all hesitation or fear or just confusion about what that one thing is that you want to pursue, go set up a call with me, literally no cost, no obligation. I'm not going to try to sell you something. Go to discoverywithclaire.com and book a 15-minute conversation with me and let me help you get unstuck.
I love it. Well, Claire, that's your place where they can do that. I'm going to scroll again. This is where you can get a copy of the decision dashboard. I love that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, Claire, thank you so much for being with us today. You did an amazing job. I'm just so excited that we had an opportunity to bring you on the show. And like I said, I've got a bunch of notes I wrote down of things that we certainly can implement in our business. So thank you so much.
Awesome, Pat. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, listen, thank you. Our pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, as I always say before we leave our show, be healthy, be safe, be happy. Have an awesome day. Take care.